Welcome to the Campaign Trend Podcast, where you're joining in on a conversation with the entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. I'm your host, Eric Wilson. Today, I'm joined by Josh Bandoch, head of policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. Josh has spent over a decade studying the science of persuasion, mining psychology, neuroscience, and political history, and putting it to work as a speechwriter for cabinet secretaries and senior government leaders, strategic communications consultant at Booz Allen, and now as the author of a new book, How to Get What You Want, Mastering the Art and Science of Persuasion, published by Simon & Schuster, out next week. His central argument is one I think our audience really needs to hear, which is that persuasion isn't about winning an argument. It's about moving people to shared action. So we'll dig into what that them first mindset actually looks like, how our brains really process political messages, and what campaigns in 2026 should be doing differently. Josh, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what persuasion means, especially in politics. People hear persuasion and they think manipulation, tricking voters, brainwashing consumers. And you argue it's something fundamentally different. So set the scene for us. What is persuasion in its most honest form, and why does that distinction matter for people running campaigns?
Good question. And just first, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening. So persuasion is the difference between having a good idea and having other people embrace it. Whether it's a policy idea, whether you want someone to vote for you, right? To embrace the idea that you are the right candidate, as opposed to, maybe, or to something at home with your family, your friends. It's actually having people embrace that idea. So we, I think, often misunderstand what persuasion is. There are two really common misconceptions of persuasion that I think really hinder our ability to get what we want. The first is that persuasion is about winning. And Eric, if I win against you, what does that make you?
Loser.
Loser, right? Oh my God, that's terrible. Do you want to work with somebody who makes you feel like a loser?
Not particularly.
No, and in fact, what it often ends up doing is it turns somebody into an enemy. And they will fight tooth and nail. And I think we see that in politics a lot, where you make somebody an enemy and because human beings have these things called memories, and they're long. The second misconception of persuasion is that it's about convincing someone to think like you. And the trouble starts if you examine the Latin root of the word convince. It actually means to vanquish or to conquer. And conquest is barbaric. It's not persuasive. So besides, there's only one person who thinks like you, and that's you. And I don't even agree with everything that I did yesterday. So as you alluded to in your awesome framing and introduction, what is persuasion? It's shared action. It's shared because it's something that we voluntarily do with others. And it's action because it is about getting things done. Now, what's the difference between persuasion and manipulation? You could think the Force, Star Wars, light side versus dark side. You could just think simply a knife, right? Do you want to be Luke Skywalker or Yoda, or do you want to be Darth Vader? Do you want to use the knife to make a beautiful meal for your friends and family, or do severe harm to somebody? It's true that the tools in the book and the tools of persuasion can be used for great harm to people. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you manipulate, whether you're in a campaign or you're just talking to friends and family? The missionary reason is that it's wrong. We all know that it's wrong. The mercenary reason for that is that it always comes back to bite you much quicker and much harder than you expect. People find out, they know that you're manipulating them. They feel that something's off. They find out that it's off. They don't want to work with you, and they tell other people, don't work with you.
Yeah. And a key concept that you lay out early in the book is the them first mindset. So you're putting your audience's needs and worldview ahead of your own. In politics, we have our version of this, which, voters always want to know what's in it for me. And so why is it so hard for candidates and campaigns to actually adopt this mindset, even when we know it's the right approach?
I think it's hard for two really big reasons that relate to our cognitive wiring. Why is it so hard for, say, somebody on a campaign talking to voters to do this? The first is that human beings are wired to think and talk about ourselves. It feels when we talk about ourselves, it generates the same feelings in our brain as sex and money. So it's also a survival mechanism, because if I don't think and talk about me, who's going to? And the trouble with that is that, Eric, when I'm talking all about me to you, how does that make you feel?
I mean, you're not seen or certainly not valued.
Yeah, I mean, and just to go back to campaigns, to then kind of make the point here of the mindset I think you need to adopt. I'm not like a partisan guy, so I'll just, as an observational manner, the superpower that vaulted Bill Clinton to the presidency was his ability to empathize. He said, I feel your pain. And people really felt like he did, which was a powerful thing. So he was putting them first in part by doing that, and he empathized.
Yeah.
That was powerful. Donald Trump said the same thing in 2016. He said, I will be your voice. I will be your voice.
Yeah. Anytime I'm talking to people about how to write their marketing copy for their campaign or organize their landing pages, just go look at how software companies kind of market. And it's clear that everyone has read building a story brand and making someone the hero of theirs. Yeah. And that simple framing, once you get it through your head, really just kind of, you start to see it everywhere. And you've identified kind of 4 insights about how our brains actually work when it comes to persuasion. And I wanted to walk through each one. And so the first one is we feel first, then reason. And I think this is an area where, admittedly, conservatives struggle the most, especially in the think tank world that you come from. There seems to be this idea that, hey, if everyone were just smarter and read all our white papers, they would vote Republican forever. What does science actually tell us about this logic first approach and why it keeps falling flat?
So there are 4 kind of key parts in the middle of the book, key aspects of our cognitive wiring that really hinder our ability to persuade. That's already on top of being wired to think about ourselves, which is why you need to flip that and put them first. So what are they? The first one, I hate it. I hate it, and it's just true. This is what all the neuroscience and all of the psychology say. All human beings, all 8 billion of us, we are wired to feel first, then reason. Sometimes it's feel, boom, reason. Sometimes it's feel, then reason. Sometimes it's feel and we never get to reasoning. And folks who say they work at a think tank, they do policy work, they know that they put a tremendous amount of thought into this. Elected officials, right? They really want to get the policy right. And I agree with you that I think conservatives are more guilty of this. So we can talk about that separately. They think that it's thinking that comes first. And so they have to lead with logic. They even think sometimes maybe they should launch a logic tsunami at people because that'll wash away the misconceptions that they have. Does that ever work against you?
No, because I employ motivated reasoning, which is I justify how I feel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even when somebody who you agree with does that to you, you experience reactance and you actually step away from your own beliefs because you dislike how that person is behaving towards you. So it turns out, moreover, that people who tragically suffer brain damage and lose the ability to emote, it actually impairs their reasoning. What does all this mean? It means 2 things. It means first that the logic first approach to persuasion, white paper, or let me show you my data and PowerPoints, it's actually illogical because it does not conform with the cognitive realities of our brain. So second, the upshot of that is that you have to start with feelings. Persuasion starts with feelings, which means that you need to generate persuasive feelings. I know this is it's a tough pill to swallow, and it is in accordance with all the neuroscience.
Yeah. And so the second insight is be for something.
Yeah.
And again, this is a tough one for my side because so much of conservative politics is stopping bad ideas, blocking regulations, opposing tax increases, fighting mandates, what Grover Norquist calls the sort of leave us alone coalition. And so how does a candidate who believes in limited government frame that vision in a way that's affirmatively for something rather than just against the other side's argument?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would just add that I think campaigns kind of fall into the same trap where it's only negative. So what's the trouble? Being negative makes sense. It's aligned with our wiring. We are wired with something called negativity bias, which means that we are attuned to, sensitive to, pay attention a lot more, respond to, think about negative things, threats, which makes sense. That's a survival mechanism. The problem is that it impedes our ability to thrive. So let me ask you, who do you think some of the most persuasive Americans of the last 20 years are? Last 100 years.
Well, I mean,
Most persuasive.
we go to more recent examples like Barack Obama, really strong orator. I guess Martin Luther King Jr., again, really persuasive speaker.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan,
Absolutely.
Who really understood the visuals of the presidency. Those are the first that come to mind.
100%. And I'll add one if you don't mind, JFK. People's
If you
minds,
must. Yeah.
if I must, right? People's minds always go to the exact same people for a reason, because deep down we all know that they were so persuasive. What did they do? And then juxtapose that against their counterparts, essentially, who were at that same level, but not really. So what did they do? They were happy warriors. They were for something. JFK said, "Ask not." Nobody ever says Walter Mondale. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream. No one ever says Malcolm X. Ronald Reagan saw America as a shining city on a hill. Nobody ever says Barry Goldwater. Barack Obama talked about hope and change. Nobody ever says Al Gore. So we know this. They were for things. So what does that mean for whether you're on the policy space, you're in a campaign, or just at home, anything else? It means you have to be for something, because that is the best way to generate persuasive feelings. The goal is not to get somebody so angry that in the moment they kind of agree with your anger and they get you to act now. The goal is to get people to act repeatedly. And all the negativity wears people out. We know Americans are tired of it. They see our culture politically is toxic and they just don't want to engage. And it's that positivity that animates action time after time after time. That's how you build a movement. Ronald Reagan built a movement. 50 years later, people still call him the great communicator for a reason, because he was. So it's hard. You got to fight your wiring, and we know deep down what works.
You're listening to the Campaign Trend Podcast. You're listening to the Campaign Trend Podcast. I'm speaking with Josh Bandoch about his new book, How to Get What You Want. So the third principle is activate their moral tastes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a unique phrase. What are the specific ingredients here, the moral foundations that we tap into? And again, how should a campaign think about this?
Absolutely. So this is probably the hardest one, particularly for folks in the political space. Let me ask you, though, would you force feed a vegetarian veal?
Probably not.
Would you force feed somebody who keeps kosher bacon?
Yeah, absolutely not. Right.
Okay, why do I say that? Because on our actual tongue, we have 5 or 6 physical taste receptors: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami, maybe fat, ole gustus. So it turns out that really great research in moral psychology has shown that that's actually how morality works too. We have wired, get back to that in a second, into our hearts and minds 6, maybe 7 moral tastes. Let me say what they are, and then I'm gonna get to the wiring and how this divides politically, why this is so hard for campaigns and what you have to do. So here's what they are. The first is care, essentially sensitivity to suffering and harm and helping people and things like that. The second is equity, which is a concern for equal outcomes. The third is proportionality, which is about hard work and merit. The fourth is loyalty, in groups and out groups, patriotism, us versus them. The fifth is hierarchy, or is authority, essentially respect for hierarchies. The sixth is purity, things that are sacred versus things that are disgusting. The last is liberty, being free to live as you choose. Now, before I say how these separate politically, it is really important to understand that these are actually wired into us. We know this through studies of twins, that 30 to 60% of our moral values are wired into us.
So before you get to that, does that mean it's sort of like our tongues where everyone has these, or are some people more towards one or the other?
Well, so how does this cash out politically, right? It turns out that folks on the left are primarily sensitive to 2 or 3 moral tastes. They are primarily sensitive to care. They're super high in care, and they're really high in equity. And then they're sensitive to like a kind of liberty, which is more about making people free to do things, say through like welfare programming. So it's like a little different. Folks who are conservative, they have a totally separate moral palette. They are sensitive to proportionality, like hard work, loyalty, authority, purity, and the traditional kind of American sense of liberty, being free to live as you choose. Libertarians have a similar but much narrower moral palette, which is about liberty and proportionality. So to answer your question and to get back to the campaign thing too, folks on the left and the right, they have distinct non-overlapping moral palettes on average. That does not mean that no conservatives are high in care or no progressives are high in loyalty, but on average, this is how things cash out, which means that the left and the right literally speak different moral languages. They have different values, and those values are up to 60% wired into them.
That's wild.
So,
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, so what does that mean for a campaign? Because it's really hard. If you're a conservative talking to, say, if you're in like a left-leaning district, or even just you're talking to a broader audience than just people who are, say, like really conservative, kind of in the middle somewhere, you can't only make moral appeals that are going to resonate with your audience or with people who think like you, because they're not going to have those same values. You need to think, how do I authentically, underline, bold, highlight, exclamation point, how do I authentically advocate for what I believe in a way that will also appeal to my audience?
All right. So the fourth and final one is tell morally motivating, emotionally intelligent stories. You write that we're story processors before we're logic processors. And so why are stories so uniquely powerful for persuasion? And what separates a good story for a campaign from a bad one?
Great question. We are wired for story in the name of a great book. We're wired for story. That's just how the brains work. Stories stick in a way that logic or data or reasoning, a PowerPoint, a white paper, never, ever, ever, ever could. When I talk to folks in the policy space, I say, look, if you could deliver a 30-minute white paper PowerPoint presentation or a 30-second story, in 99.999% of the cases, you should always deliver the story. And they're like, no, that can't be true. And it's like, well, it just is. So we are wired for story. What does a good story look like? I want to tackle that at two levels. The first is just the nuts and bolts. You got to have a hero in your story. And it's usually better as a politician or campaigner if you're not the hero, makes you look kind of arrogant. So celebrate other people. If you happen to be, say, a businessman, you don't have to pick your business as the hero. Pick somebody else's business. Make them the hero. And ideally, they're going to go through the hero's journey. So suppose that you are being critical of lots of burdensome regulations. You might talk about how a business owner, John or Susie or whoever, was struggling. And you want to personalize this, how he was struggling and what this meant. And maybe if he was able to kind of overcome some of these things, it's like, okay, well, what is the journey that he went on so that you have a happy ending? Because there aren't many stories that have a sad ending that people actually want to watch again. So that's the basics, right? A hero's journey with a happy ending. How do you do that? Because what I talk about in the book, there's a chapter on this, which I think is one of the big innovations in the book, is that the best stories are morally motivating, emotionally intelligent stories. So when you're crafting what happens in the story and the kinds of language that you use, it has to motivate people morally. We now know how to do that, having talked about the moral tastes. So if you're talking to conservatives, you would make sure in your story you're talking about, say, hard work and merit. If you're talking about the business owner, for example, right? It's like, make sure you use that language. If you were talking to someone on the left, you might talk about how these burdens and regulations, they really hurt poor people, and that's unfair. So the same thing, burdens and regulations are bad. It's just that why they're bad and why you should instead do something else would be a little bit different.
Do you, just stepping aside for a minute, do you get the sense, and I'm thinking about the Daniel Kahneman, thinking fast and slow here, right? And our processing is the approach here that, in a perfect world, if we were all rational consumers, the white paper, the 30-minute presentation would be the thing that sticks. But because we have this sort of operating efficiency, that these are the methods, almost like slipping past the firewall of someone and knowing the vulnerabilities, these are kind of like the fast lanes to get into someone. Is that how we should think about these sort of 4 paths or principles?
I used to agree with the notion that, okay, well, it really would be better if we were simply logical and just had the time, but it's not like that. Okay, fine, just accept it. And throughout the course of, this has been a decade-long project, working on this, I've actually come to embrace the power of our intuitions because they're grounded in reason. So when you feel like something's off, there's almost always a reason for it. And that when people say trust your gut, I've actually much more learned to like, no, trust your gut. The feelings come from somewhere, and that we actually have this built in, like super quick reaction to things that is usually pretty accurate and actually even enhances our reasoning process. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, well, I think that's my sort of contrarian take on all of this is I think everyone is rational when you understand what their incentives are,
100%, absolutely.
And their incentives aren't always obvious to us. So,
Right,
that's
put them first too. Just
right.
by the way, because when you understand their incentives, then you appeal to their incentives, even if they're not your incentive.
And Josh, you dedicate a whole chapter to going beyond the words, things like likability, tone, body language. And so for candidates who are out there, maybe knocking on doors, creating social media videos, how much do those nonverbal signals matter relative to the actual message, what they're saying? And are there any, I guess, mistakes that you see commonly from candidates?
That's a great question. There's research that shows that how we experience somebody can be as little as 7% the words that they say. So the answer to your question is 93%. It's up to 93% tone and body language. And if we put all the effort into getting the words right, and I have a lot of strategies for that in the book, and we don't get other things right, and actually, if we get them wrong, you're done, because we experience this thing called reactance, which is, basically when somebody pushes us on something, we pull back and we just resist it. So the right words delivered the wrong way can be super counterproductive. So what should candidates do? 4 things. The first is be likable. That's not the same as being liked. I can't control if somebody likes me. I can be likable. And again, we intuitively, back to the intuitions, kind of all know what that looks like, right? Being nice, not being difficult, like being a little more agreeable, things like that. And you can control those things. You can decide when you're talking to a voter or you're calling customer service, because you should practice these things. Well, when you're talking to anybody, do you want to make an effort to be really nice and likable or be a jerk? I don't know, you pick. One really good way, tip 2, to be likable is to be curious. And when you engage with your audience, voters or customer service or policy folks, anybody, other elected officials, be curious about them and what makes them tick. In fact, one super way to do that is to ask them, when you start a conversation, what's your story? Back to being story processors. Say, hey, what's your story? It's so powerful. People just unleash all these amazing things. The third thing is to watch your tone. Because if I say to you, Eric, that's a great idea. It's okay. There's enthusiasm in my voice. If I say, Eric, that's a great idea. Same words, tone a little bit different. And for anybody who's seeing the video here, I also roll my eyes. So what's the last thing? Watch your body language. You want to do 2 things. You want to adopt persuasive body language and avoid unpersuasive or contemptuous body language. So 3 quick things here. One really good thing that you can do, which if you look at Angela Merkel, Elon Musk, Jamie Foxx, others, they do this thing called hand steepling, which again, for folks on the visual, they can see, they put their hands like this. It's basically you're demonstrating confidence without dominating somebody else. So if you Google any of those folks recently, you're going to see them always hand steepling. Folks on the camera can see this. The second thing is to avoid eye rolling, because it is a tremendous sign of contempt. And the third, and here's like a little, this is a fun one, watch how somebody smiles at you. because there are fake smiles and real smiles. You walk down the street and somebody does a fake smile simply by raising the corners of their mouth. It's not real because their eyes didn't lift up. So when you engage other people, look at their eyes when they smile at you and see if the eyes raise too. And if the eyes raise too, it's a real smile. And if it's not, that smile was forced, literally. Yeah. So.
Well, now that I'm sufficiently self-conscious about my tone and how I look on this podcast, let's bring this all together for the practitioner listening right now. If you're a campaign manager or candidate running in 2026, you've gone out and bought the book, you're reading it, bought in on this framework. What does putting this knowledge into practice actually look like at campaign headquarters when I show up in the morning?
So you got to start by understanding what your vision is, what your North Star is for your space, whether you're running for governor, city council, Congress, whatever. What's your vision? And that has to be a positive vision. You have to be for things because that's what's going to animate people, not just to vote for you, but ideally to join a movement. And that's what's going to motivate everything. That's how you generate the persuasive feelings. That's what drives the stories. And when I talk to audiences, I talk sometimes to conservative audiences, like, well, are you just against all these things? They're like, no. I was like, well, what are you for? And then we go through and it's like 20 or 30 things. It's like, they're for freedom and families and community and opportunity and growth and all these sorts of things, innovation, creation. So figure out what you're for. I work especially in the opportunity space. So I am for things like opportunity and families and independence and dignity through work and things like that. So I lead with that, even though I, for example, see our welfare system as really hurting people and disincentivizing work. I say, yes, that's a problem. And ultimately, we're for these things. Mm-hmm. What are you for? What are the stories you're going to tell? And then make sure that when you do that, you are likable and approachable and that people are excited to engage with you. That would be my, it's about 75-second version of what you should do.
Great. And, you've seen a lot of candidates and campaigns, both as a speechwriter and someone who studies this for a living. What's the thing that you always hear where it's like nails on the chalkboard? That this is just like a habit or instinct that you hear from politicians that you want them to stop doing yesterday?
Authenticity. Because, when somebody really believes something or not. Maybe it's just that they haven't prepared. As a speechwriter, sometimes principals were hyper prepared and they edit the speech, and sometimes it was like they're reading it when they get up there. So it didn't feel authentic simply because they hadn't even read it before. It's just like picking up a random book and reading it. You're like, okay. Much more deeply though, when we say, politicians and people kind of have that icky feeling, it's because in a lot of cases they feel inauthentic. And you just have to figure out how, in front of different audiences, to be the best, most authentic version of yourself. And that's going to resonate with people because they're going to like you and trust you. And if you don't do that, they're not going to trust you all the way. And that's going to always be a barrier to getting what you want.
All right. My thanks to Josh Bandoch for a great conversation. You can learn more about him in our show notes. His new book, How to Get What You Want, Mastering the Art and Science of Persuasion, is now available for pre-order and is out next week. If this episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something to think about, you know that all we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. You look smarter in the process. More people hear about the show. It's a win-win. Remember to subscribe to the Campaign Trend Podcast wherever you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. And be sure and visit our website, campaigntrend.com. With that, I'll say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.